The Bureaucrat, a novel, by Levi Sweeney, read by the author. Chapter 17, Last Rodeo. It was 2 weeks after Donald J. Trump won the 2024 election. It was a very fair Tuesday. Steve and Thomas were driving along in a 2024 Toyota Camry on a day trip to Grays Harbor County. "You still got your mojo, Mr. D?" said Steve as they zoomed down I-90. He had his big white Stetson hat on, of course. "I think so, Steve," said Thomas. "I'm wondering about Travis, though." Steve shook his head. "The Myber people really do not like him," he said. "Or me and Mari and Danforth." Thomas D. lay back in his seat. He had been up late last night, thinking about Lena. They talked on the phone. Last night. It had been years. He had to take a melatonin after he hung up. It kind of sort of almost helped. The conversation lasted just 4 minutes and 32 seconds. She was just calling to check in. Thomas shook his head. "Later. Think about Lena later. Do your party trick. Play Socrates one more time. You fly out the Monday after Thanksgiving. Just focus on that." Thomas wondered if he could wake himself up by talking shop with Steve. Steve was focused on the road, studying it carefully. If he registered Thomas D's visible discomfort, he said nothing. Good. "Steve," said Thomas, "where did the partisans of Mr. Myber even come from? Are they all MAGA types, or, people like you and me support Everett, the surefire winner of the primary. Now both Myber and Everett are toast, out of the game, and all the people who wanted Myber really bad, they're probably going to mount a hostile takeover of the WSRP. Then what?" Steve just focused on the road. "I don't know, Thomas. I don't worry about it." Thomas nodded. "Okay." They arrived in Hoquiam, in Grays Harbor County, a little early, but not too early. Thomas D. was scheduled to be the speaker. Hoquiam was very west of Seattle, even further away from South Seattle than the location of Jack Glassman's memorial service. Hoquiam was an old mariner town. Lots of bridges, lots of water. Very quiet, very sleepy. Very unlike Spokane. Hoquiam was on the ocean, right there, on the Pacific. Thomas liked the sea. Thomas D. was thinking about Jack right now, as he sat in the front row of a low-rent Baptist church. Steve German was shooting the breeze with the Grays Harbor County chair. His name was Harry or something. Older guy, possibly almost Jack's age when Jack passed away. Thomas D. was taking a power nap. He would get his energy back soon. He woke up. The meeting started in 10 minutes. There were other people there. Nobody had bothered him the whole time. Thomas D. then walked over to Steve and Jerry, the chair, introduced himself, apologized for not hobnobbing before the meeting, and they all got on the same page. Thomas was going to give one of his speeches. The chair, Jerry Wilkins, began going over the party business. Pledge of Allegiance, roll call, had the treasurer give a report, discussed old business, new business, upcoming events, all the standard stuff. That took about 35 minutes. Then Thomas D. got on the stage. Thomas D. was given a mic. He was ready. He had data on the audience. He told Steve about Coeur d'Alene. Steve understood. He was like a favorite uncle by now. Steve helped him find the data, the information. Thomas prepared to speak. "Good evening, members of the Grays Harbor County GOP. My name is Thomas D., and I'm a PCO from Seattle, and also an LD chair who sits on the King County GOP Executive Board. I'm also the former secretary of the King County Young Republicans. After consulting extensively with my colleague Steve German, first vice chair for the KCGOP, I will be retiring from politics in December of this year. But Steve asked me to give one more of my speeches to you fine gentlemen and ladies here in Grays Harbor County. I will now oblige. Thank you for having me here. I will begin." Thomas studied the audience. About 20 people, mostly elderly, a lone 30-something, with similar physique as Marco Tonlin. Most of them were men, very few women. All were white, except for one black man in a San Francisco Giants trucker hat. This was a very rural, very old party, long past its prime. Jack would probably have loved grabbing lunch and a Diet Coke with some of these guys, thought Thomas. He was ready. "I'd like to ask you all some questions tonight," said Thomas D. "In the course of my time as a party activist, I have met people of all kinds. Young, old, middle-aged, white, black, Asian, Hispanic, and biracial. Men and women, gay and straight, good and bad." Thomas paused. "I'd first like to conduct a brief poll. A straw poll, an informal survey." He paused again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my first question. What is more important in a leader, experience or education? Pause. Raise your hand if you think experience is the most important attribute in a leader, as opposed to education. Silence. They were thinking. They had all heard him. The church's speakers were great. Thomas had spoken clearly. And then, about 60% raised their hands. Very good, said Thomas. Now, the opposite question. If you think that education is more important than experience as a leader, now please, raise your hand. If you are not totally sure, it is okay to not raise your hand at all. Some 15% of the crowd raised their hands. There was a sizable not sure demographic. Said Thomas. File that one away for later. All right, said Thomas. This is good. I would like to invite 2 members of the audience to come up to the front. First, you, in the baseball cap and the blue MAGA shirt. Please come to the front. The youngest man in the room, who had raised his hand in favor of experience, came to the front. Thomas pointed to somebody else. And you, in the shorts and button-up plaid shirt, with a goatee and sunglasses, please come to the front. That man, perhaps a relatively well-preserved 75-year-old, who had raised his hand in favor of education, came to the front. Thomas nodded, beaming. This was going to be fun. Sir, he said to the younger man, what is your name? Josh Tonelli, said the young man. He had stubble. He was a bit tubby. Thomas was out of shape, but not overweight. Thank you, said Thomas, to the older man. You, sir, what is your name? Denny Caldwell, at your service, said the older man, smiling broadly. He had some gold teeth. All right, Josh and Denny, said Thomas. I'll ask you some questions. Also, ladies and gentlemen, I know we only have so much time for this dialogue, so bear with me. It will be wrapped up by dusk. Thomas said, Josh, you raised your hand when you said you thought experience mattered more than education in a leader, generally speaking. Is that true? Yeah, said Josh. Clearly, loud enough for everyone in the reading room to hear. He had no mic, and neither did Denny. Yeah, I raised my hand. Yeah. Okay, said Thomas. Josh, what kind of experience should a good leader have in order to become good at being a leader? What kind of experience? Josh folded his arms and thought deeply. Thomas Dean knew, via Steve, that Josh Tonelli was a member of the Washington State YRs, that Josh knew Marco, but not Thomas. Did Josh Tonelli know about Thomas Dean's reputation? Unknown. Josh had actually been in the same hotel as Thomas during the state convention. Well, said Josh, I guess a good leader should have experience doing technical work. I mean, if you're like the executive director of a nonprofit or a think tank which studies like aviation policy, I think it would make sense for that person to have been an airline pilot in the past, or at least have extensive training and certifications and experience as a pilot, commercial or amateur. I wouldn't want the executive director to just be, say, an academic or a lawyer who, like, maybe knows a lot about aviation policy, but, has never even wanted to fly a plane. Maybe the ideal candidate for that job needs both of those things. So, yeah, experience is, in my book, more important than education, and the experience I'm talking about is practical and technical, as opposed to academic and theoretical. Just my 2 cents. Thomas Dean nodded. Now this was really interesting. Josh Tonelli was really smart. Streetwise might be the correct word. Thank you, Josh, said Thomas. Now, I'd like to ask a different question to our friend Mr. Caldwell. Denny Caldwell snickered and shook his head. I'm just Denny, Thomas. All right, Denny. Denny, you raised your hand just a moment ago, indicating that you agree that education is more important for a leader to have than experience. Is that true, that you raised your hand? I did, yes. Now, Denny, what kind of education must a leader have in order to become a good leader? What kind of education would you suggest? Denny just laughed and shook his head. Who knows what he thought of Thomas? Maybe nothing. Well, said Denny, making sure to speak up and raise his voice so others could hear. I also think that to answer a question like that, you'd have to ask, what kind of leader are you be talking about? I mean, yes, I do believe that education is a bit more important than experience, but, well, there are a lot of different activities which need leaders, and not all leaders need to be prepared for that job in the same way. I mean, I guess, if you need somebody to coach a football team, lead them to the Super Bowl or whatever, well, that coach had better be educated in however they educate star football coaches. Maybe experience is a part of that education. And, well, if you need somebody to run a big hospital, you might want somebody, a doctor perhaps, who went to a top school for many, many years, is educated that way. It's a broad question, son, really broad. Just to repeat, what kind of leader are we talking about here? Thomas grinned broadly. He had traveled more than 100 miles to give this talk. Now he was learning something new. Thank you, Denny, said Thomas. Plenty of excellent points. I'll ask a few more questions, then we'll see how late it is. Thomas looked at the back, where Steve German was loitering. "Steve, please keep an eye on that back window, and let me know when it is about dusk." "Sure thing, Thomas," hollered Steve German. "All right," said Thomas. "Now let me ask you both some follow-up questions." Thomas turned to Josh Tonelli. "Josh, the president-elect is quite aged. The former president is also very elderly. In fact, very few presidents have been younger than even 50 when they were first elected. You know this, I'm sure. Now, a question for you. Should our next president be young, or should he be old?" Josh grinned big. He loved this question. "Young," he said, strongly, clearly. Thomas nodded. "And you, Denny, same question." Denny nodded, smiling big, showing his gold teeth. "I agree. We need a young guy in office in 2028. Like Vance." Some clapping from the audience. Thomas grinned. He did not like J.D. Vance. But he did like these men here. "Josh," said Thomas, "why do you want a young president after the current one serves out his term?" Josh chuckled and shook his head. He said nothing. Thomas: "Please humor me, Josh. I value all opinions, no matter their nature, so long as the people who have them are benign." Josh laughed out loud. "God, I love you, man," he said, triggering laughter from the audience. Okay, yeah," said Josh, taking his hands out of his pockets. "We have had a lot of gray-haired people as POTUS. No offense to present company, of course." More laughter, louder, some jokey boos. "And, well," said Josh, "I'm a millennial, right? I mean, we've had a first boomer president. We've almost had a first Gen Xer president. Kamala, thank God she lost." Clapping. "But," said Josh, "I want to still be alive when somebody my age, or about my age, takes the oath of office. And I don't know if it will be JD or Marco Rubio or Tulsi or Vivek, but yeah, I want somebody up there in the Oval Office who, who knows how to open a PDF." Thomas doubled over in laughter, but he was the only one. He dimly heard somebody in the front row, it may have been the black man in the SF Giants cap, say to his neighbor, "What's a PDF, Jim?" Thomas regained his composure. "Good one, Josh," he said. "Final question. I see Steve waving in the back. We'll call it a night after this. Denny, why do you think we need a young person to be the next president, whether that person is J.D. Vance or somebody else who is, well, young?" Denny had his arms folded, still smiling, still showing gold teeth. "Well, it just feels like common sense, honestly," he said. Thomas saw that Denny was wearing a large gold ring on his right hand. He recognized the symbol on it. Thomas D's thoughts. "That's the emblem of a college fraternity on that ring. A very important, exclusive one, Denny. What I would love to know about you, Mr. Caldwell, what I would love to know." "Tell us why you think it's just common sense to want a young president next," said Thomas. Denny snickered and shrugged his shoulders. "Well, let's just say that I prefer somebody like you in charge when I'm gone than somebody like me." Thomas lost his grin. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't. JJD had said almost the exact thing to Thomas D 8 years ago while the two were out to dinner for Thomas D's 18th birthday. Thomas remembered that entire conversation. Denny's offhand reply was totally uncanny. Thomas recovered after a few seconds, but Steve noticed. Thomas knew he noticed. Steve German looked visibly concerned. After the meeting ended, Thomas and Steve went out to a hole-in-the-wall Chinese restaurant in Hoquiam's downtown core. They had a nice big meal and a long, lively, deep conversation. Then they drove home all night, stopping in Bellevue, where Thomas got an Uber home to his apartment, went to bed, and slept soundly and quietly, with no need for over-the-counter drugs. This is The Bureaucrat, a novel by Levi Sweeney, read by the author. You have been listening to Chapter 17. Thank you.